Hello, everybody. Welcome to the No BS Zone. I'm Bernie Goldberg, here with my good friend from Colorado, John Daly. John, how are you?
I'm good. How about you, Bernie?
Good. Next week, President Biden will be former President Biden. So, John and I thought it would be a good idea to talk for a few minutes about his legacy, his 4 years in office. Uh, the administration says they're very close to a deal between Hamas and Israel. If that, I've heard that about 100 times in the past month or so. If that happens this time, good for Joe Biden. That'll be part of his legacy. But until that happens, it isn't part of anything. We've gone down this road many times that have led to nowhere. Anyway, about his presidency. According to news reports, you ready for this? Joe Biden's his biggest regret is that he dropped out of the race because he said he thought he was the best candidate to beat Donald Trump. And these are his words: I beat him once and I will beat him again. Then he also said, I mean, that's delusional, by the way. He wasn't going to beat Donald Trump. He even said that after his disastrous debate performance. But he also said Kamala Harris could have beaten Donald Trump also. What? Hello? What are you talking about, Mr. President? Or Mr. Former President, whatever. Kamala Harris ran and she didn't win. What do you mean she could have beaten Donald Trump? I guess I
I,
could have beaten Donald Trump, but I didn't. Well, anyway, let me just make a couple of other points, and then I'm going to throw it to you, John. Joe Biden was elected as a transitional president. He was going to serve one term, a link between the old and the new, except he decided he wanted to stay in office and run for 4 more years. I understand giving up power is not easy. People don't like giving up power. So I get it. He was supposed to be a moderate candidate. And as soon as he got elected, he thought he was the second coming of LBJ or FDR. Things he said that didn't come out the way he said they would. He said that the 2020 surge in migration was seasonal. Joe Biden's words. It happens every single solitary year. Wrong. He said about the Taliban, he said they would not swiftly seize power in Afghanistan. His words. The likelihood is going to be a Taliban takeover, overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely. Wrong. He said inflation was transitory, that our experts believe, and the data shows that most of the price increases we've seen are expected to be temporary. Wrong again. We could talk about the pardons, but the one for his son, Hunter, I understand it. I would pardon my son, but you know what? I wouldn't lie to the American people over and over again, saying I was not going to pardon him and then do it. This is all part of his legacy. I think I'm going to be generous for a few seconds. I think his presidency has been mediocre at best mediocre, and at worst, not a very good presidency at all. I'm going to throw it to you. You may have a totally different view. John and I have not discussed this. John, take over.
well, it's funny that part about him saying that I beat him once, I would have beaten him again. He actually added the that part about Kamala Harris later on because he initially just said that about himself. He didn't say that about her. But regardless, it's ridiculous. In 2020, Biden was, we'll call it, adequate enough to beat Donald Trump because after 4 years, people were exhausted with Trump. They just were, especially after his failed leadership on the pandemic. I still don't think it can be overstated just how badly those COVID press conferences went over with the American public. I mean, you had millions of frightened, desperate voters who were, tuning into them, hoping for guidance and hoping for answers. And what they got were clown shows. And I think people just kind of realized, after this went on for months and months, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's not who we want to stay with. All Biden had to do after winning his party's nomination was basically present himself as somewhat normal, somewhat competent, and that was enough. He didn't even have to leave his basement, as many people in the MAGA right are fond of pointing out. Um, by 2024, completely different situation. By then, he was a very unpopular incumbent president. Inflation was really hurting him. The border was really hurting him. And any shot that he had of turning things around died with that horrific debate with Donald Trump because it confirmed what a lot of people had already suspected, that he was mentally unfit to serve. And yeah, I mean, I think you are being a little, when you call him a mediocre president, I don't think he's the worst president in history, as many on the right do. But yeah, I think he was a bad president. I was calling him, I think, a failed president just a few months into his first term after the Afghanistan thing. I mean, it's that thing went so far south, and it always was going to, because it was a bad policy, whether it would be Trump or Biden that did it. I've written columns on that. I won't get into it now, but Biden, up until that point, had a honeymoon in the polls with American voters. Afghanistan, just people did not like seeing what happened there, and he never came back from it. He only got worse, with the American public. So yeah, there's no way he would have, if he had stayed in. That was sure suicide for the Democratic Party.
But the delusions, they ran through his presidency. It's not just now that he thinks he could have beaten Donald Trump. He thought Afghanistan was a great success. I mean, they never acknowledged not unlike other presidents, Donald Trump is who I have in mind. He can't admit he ever made a mistake. That's what bothers me. Anyway, Kimberly Strassel in the Wall Street Journal collected a few items about how Biden is spending the last days in his office trying to build his legacy. Let me give you some examples from her column. His historic clemency, that's a quotation, historic clemency of federal death row murderers. The most ever in a single day of clemency for 1,500 federal felons, the most ever in a single day. The number topped any of his recent predecessors on commutations. He's the best, he's the greatest. His order creating more national monuments and walling land off from developments makes him the president who, quote, conserved more lands and waters than any other US president in history. Again, we get the greatest in history. His latest illegal student loan relief plan, he's forgiven more student loan debt than any administration in history. He is busy building his legacy, and he thinks if he tells people that what he's doing has never been done before in history, it will be part of his legacy. Now, legacies depend on who's writing history. And if liberals are writing history, he may go down as a great transitional president. I don't think he is. One more thing before I move on. The Medal of Honor winners recently, the Medal of Honor that was bestowed on several people. All right, Donald Trump bestowed his Medal of Honor on some questionable characters also. But Anna Wintour, who runs Vogue magazine, she runs a fashion magazine, and she gets the Medal of Honor, the highest civilian award. Is it possible that she got it because Anna Wintour, who runs Vogue, put Jill Biden on the cover of the magazine twice? Did anybody see The Devil Wears Prada about Anna Wintour? I mean, she was not a nice person, and yet she gets the Medal of Honor. It's just a sleazy way to go out. I mean, I don't know how he could have done it differently, except to say everything he's done, he should have done differently. Everything he's done was the wrong thing to do in his final days in office. I'm going to give the last word about Biden to you, and then let's move on.
Well, right. George Soros was another person who got that Medal of Honor. And like I said, a president can give those to basically whoever he wants. As you mentioned, Trump, he gave one to some really high-end donors to his campaign. So it's not. Yeah, I think there's, you have some good things. You have some, Denzel Washington pop culture figures. Even those you can sort of challenge, but that's what it's become. It's become pop culture figures, whoever, a president wants to recognize. So I'm not too bent out of shape over it. I kind of recognize it for what it was. But yeah, it's Biden can say, he can go down in history as having done some things that hadn't been done before, but that's not necessarily a good thing, as you pointed out.
Well, the woman who runs Vogue magazine, I mean, Denzel Washington, sure, he's a popular culture figure. Uh, Anna Wintour, Vogue magazine, because she put Jill Biden on the cover twice. Come on. All right, listen, we have two more subjects, and these are things I came up with only so that I could throw them to you, John, because I have no idea about any of the significance of any. All right, from the Conservative Media Research Center, in the last 6 months of 2024, the percentage of late night comedy guests that were liberal, 99% of the late night guests were liberal. From June to the end of December, late night comedy shows had 120 liberal guests, 120, and one conservative guest. Okay, that was Bill O'Reilly. Here's my question. Should anybody care about this?
No. Honestly, and I don't care. Yes, these shows are very politically lopsided, and I think everybody recognizes that. I think it's bad from a business perspective. But at the end of the day, these are entertainment programs, not news programs, even though, these comedians who host them do get very political. They're all left of center. And they clearly don't influence how people vote, at least not
Are you sure about that? I'm not saying you're wrong. I just
right.
don't know. But I think if there's significance at all to having a 99% to 1% ratio of liberals to conservatives, it would be, I'm not saying it is, it would be because people who tune in are younger and they say, oh yeah, that's funny about Donald Trump. He is a jerk. And then they vote for Kamala Harris. I mean, isn't that possible?
I guess it's possible. I mean, you got to look at the ratings of these shows too. They're not doing great. I mean, you have Greg Gutfeld on Fox News on a cable news channel that does more than these guys, and it's like, yeah, I think so few people are watching it. I don't think it affects the culture that much. Maybe there's some sort of marginal, point, but if you're doing that, you can go on the other side and see, well, Joe Rogan does this and this person does that, and who I think have much bigger followings. He actually went out and endorsed Donald Trump. So I'm not sure. I think any sort of influence they could have to move someone away from Donald Trump or move someone away from Republicans is quite marginal. I don't think it was always that way. I think they actually did have influence back, during the Bush days. David Letterman, all these other people, they had much bigger followings. But these days, I don't think it makes that much of a difference.
If I were running one of these networks, I would say Michael Jordan once said, Republicans also buy sneakers. Well,
Right.
they're cutting out half of the United States of America. Now, I'm willing to say that older people don't stay up at that hour to watch an entertainment show, but some young people are conservative. They're not all liberal, as we saw in the last presidential election, and it's just a bad business decision. I would tell Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel, Fallon isn't as bad, but I would tell those two, hey, you're liberal, fine, good for you, but your audience is made up of a lot of people and they're not all like you. So invite some conservatives on. It isn't going to kill you. It's a bad business decision. I agree. I agree with you on that, John.
And I wanted to add something too, Bernie, if you don't mind, about the study itself. You had mentioned it was done by the Media Research Center. They're also known as Newsbusters, when they appear elsewhere. But I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of Newsbusters. And those guys over there are aware of that fact, by the way. But they've gotten um, more hackier over time. I took a closer look at that study, and their definition of liberal, at least in the case of non-journalists, was basically anyone who doesn't like Donald Trump. For example, they labeled Adam Kinzinger a liberal, even though, on policy and ideology, he's largely a Reagan conservative. And for journalists, Newsbusters decided that there was really no middle ground that they factored in. If you were pro-Trump, you were considered a conservative. And like you said, Bill O'Reilly was considered a conservative. And I think he actually shies away from the conservative label when people bring that up. But and then if you were anything, literally anybody else, you were considered liberal. So by that,
They didn't invite anybody on who's obviously conservative, other than Bill O'Reilly, whatever he is.
yeah, I think that's right. But I think because they actually spelled this out in their methodology, but based on how they describe this, I think actually you and I, Bernie, would be considered liberal if we had gone on these shows based on that. But yeah,
One of our regulars thinks that we're both liberal
that's right.
hats.
That's right, Bob would agree with that for sure. So, but yeah, I think as a good faith measure, I think it's saying it's liberal versus conservative, and there were a ton of guests that they didn't count at all, who they weren't really sure, what their political ideology was. So
Look,
it's not like it was.
I'm
You know,
not saying this is, the Pew Research Center or Gallup conducting a poll, but I am saying there are people in the culture who are obviously conservative.
right.
Ann Coulter, somebody comes to mind. They didn't invite her on I mean,
Oh yeah,
unless,
no, it's definitely politically lopsided for sure. I mean, you can't even. That's without question.
okay. This last one is even less important, but it caught my eye. There's a book coming out in March. I think it's called Revenge. It's by a journalist at Politico. And in it, don't shoot the messenger here. I'm just reporting the facts as presented to me. Donald Trump reportedly pushed for Fox News anchor Maria Bartiromo to be his running mate, but his political team talked him out of it. I believe that. Maria Bartiromo was so in the pocket of Donald Trump that it was embarrassing, except at Fox, you don't get embarrassed for kissing up to Donald Trump, just as at MSNBC, you don't get embarrassed by kissing up to Kamala Harris or Joe Biden for that matter. But could you imagine, John, if something terrible happened to President Trump and he became incapacitated and we had President Bartiromo? I mean, am I missing something here? I mean, we understand why Donald Trump did it. I'll let you take that part of it. We understand why Donald Trump did it. But this is crazy. This is crazy.
I agree. And I think Trump views Fox News personalities, well, specifically those who kiss his butt on television, as being uniquely qualified to serve under him in public office. We've seen this now with Pete Hegseth, Tammy Bruce, Leo Terrell, Sebastian Gorka, Mike Huckabee, though I don't think he's been working for Fox for a while. But it's clearly important for Trump to have those people around him. And it also really matters to him when somebody presents well on television. And that's how John Bolton ended up in his administration. That's how Larry Kudlow ended up in his administration. So, yeah, I'm not surprised at all that he would have seriously considered Maria Bartiromo. That, to me, that feels very much on brand.
One last thing that I didn't tell you I want to talk about, but so if you don't have a comment, that's on me. I'm willing to give Donald Trump, as I've said, I'm keeping an open mind on his second term. I'm keeping an open mind. I'm going to see how he does before I weigh in on anything. But he's already did one thing that is so outrageous. I think it requires some comment. At least I want to comment on it. And that is his decision to sue the Des Moines Register because its chief pollster came up with bad numbers. It was a bad poll that said he would lose Iowa by whatever 3 points, I think, and lose the national race also. She's a very good pollster and she got it dead wrong. You're allowed to get something dead wrong without doing it intentionally to try to throw the election. But that's exactly what Donald Trump said she did. She did it intentionally to try to get him to lose the election. This is not going to go to a jury. No judge is going to allow this. This is a frivolous lawsuit. But then you have to say, why did he do it? And this is where it's interesting to me. He did it to send a message to other journalists and other news organizations. If you do anything that I, Donald Trump, don't like, I'm going to sue you, tie you up in court, cost you for legal expenses, and maybe you'll think twice next time before you say something negative about me. Now, my question to you, John, is that too cynical an observation, or do you think I'm onto something?
I think you're exactly right. I mean, what other reason would there be to do this? I mean, so in 2016, all kinds of polls got it wrong. Donald Trump always underpolls, just as a general rule of thumb. And was everybody there was there something nefarious about that? No. And and the idea that this Iowa State poll, I mean, I know that media pundits pay close attention to this. Most people in the country didn't have any idea what that was. That's not like saying that, he's performing poorly in this poll, so this is going to change who they were going to vote for. Well, he's doing poorly in this poll in Iowa. I better change my vote or not show up at all because it's all over. And I don't think anybody sees it that way. It doesn't make any sense. I saw that the organization called FIRE, I'm forgetting what the acronym stands for right now, but they're sort of like a more serious version of the ACLU once the ACLU kind of went in a different direction. But they're standing up for this pollster, and I think she's in pretty good hands. But yeah, I think that's what that was all about.
It's just such a ridiculous thing that the only thing more ridiculous that he's done so far is to say out loud that perhaps Canada should be the 51st state of the United States. Denmark, we could have a discussion about that. Panama Canal, we could certainly have a discussion about that. They both involve national security. Although you can't walk in and take those things away or use your military, which he hasn't ruled out, to get involved in this. But making Canada the 51st state, a grown-up doesn't talk that way. So my advice to Donald Trump, because I know he would probably be watching us today, doing the No BS zone. I know he's a big fan. He did once call me though and ask my advice, as regulars of this website know. That was a long time ago. But I would say, Donald, stick to the important stuff. Don't talk about making Canada the 51st state. Withdraw the lawsuit against the Des Moines Register. It's a stupid lawsuit. And this time, act like a grown-up, and I'll be on your side too. January 6th was a disgrace. What you did on January 6th was disgraceful. I'll even put that in the rearview mirror. I'll look only through the windshield, but please act like a grown-up.
Well, that would make Bob very happy if you were to do that, Bernie. But I was going to say, going back to that, you brought up, Donald Trump had reached out to you. This is when you were still at Fox News. We had just talked about, how much he is interested in bringing people from Fox News into his administration. I have a question for you. I'm curious, do you ever have regrets that you didn't go, hardcore Trumpian back when you were still on Fox? Because you could have ended up as like the CIA director, Bernie. And I think, weren't you actually at some point, weren't you accepted into the CIA as a young man, if I remember that correctly?
Well, that's an interesting story. I'll save that for last.
Okay.
I think if I had gone full Trump, yeah, I might have gotten a call to come down to Mar-a-Lago. Yeah, I don't think that's crazy. But what is crazy is that the idea that I might say yes to go full Trump. Look, I don't want any medals. I don't want anybody listening to think I'm patting myself on the back. But all you get from me is my honest opinion. And when I thought Donald Trump was saying or doing crazy things, I said it. And as a result, I didn't get renewed. I'm a capitalist. They can do whatever the hell they want. And I'm not going to say things just to keep my job at Fox. I'm not going to do that. Now, as far as the CIA is concerned, when I was a senior in college, I went to a job fair. There was a CIA booth. I went there. They told me to go to, I went to Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Princeton was not far away. They sent me to Princeton to take a day-long test. It was extremely difficult. I thought I failed. The day I was moving out of my apartment, because I took a job at the Associated Press, where I had worked the summer before, I accepted a job from them. There was a telegram on the floor of my apartment, a yellow envelope from Western Union. It said I passed the test and they wanted me to come down. I don't know if it was to Langley, Virginia, or wherever they were at the time, for an interview. I could have been with the CIA, and that would have been a mistake too. But yeah, I had an opportunity to be interviewed. I passed the first round. I had an opportunity to be interviewed in the second round and possibly be accepted at the CIA. Yeah, true story.
Well, I for one am glad you went into journalism. You did a lot of good. You've done a lot of good since. It's I think it was the correct career path. So I think it worked out all right.
I appreciate that, and I'm going to end with that because I don't get a lot of people saying nice things about me. Thanks for joining us. Happy New Year to everybody, a belated Happy New Year. Let's hope 2025 is a good one. And let's hope, no matter what your politics are, let's hope Donald Trump does well. Can you agree with that, John?
Well, for the country, yes. I hope he does well for the country. Not
Yeah,
necessarily
I didn't mean
yeah.
for himself.
Yeah, well, that's what that's wanted to make clear. That's why I needed to specify. Yeah, well, I always wish incoming presidents do smart things, do good things for the country. Absolutely.
And I hope Joe Biden, when he leaves office next week, just keeps a low profile. That's it
Yeah.
for this week's No BS Zone. Thanks for joining us. See you again later this month.